Welcome to the Volunteer Youth Worker Podcast. Youth ministries rise and fall on the volunteers. So we are here to encourage and equip you. Join the conversation as we tackle the practical questions you are asking so you can help the next generation know Jesus.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back for another conversation here on the Volunteer Youth Worker Podcast. We've got Sid and Lisette back chatting about just a light topic, friends, here. Just a very light, easy, breezy
just a light
topic
one.
for
Just
today.
easy,
Super
right?
light.
Coffee talk.
Super light.
Yeah, let's just shoot the breeze. Of course, last week we started off kind of in this two-part series. Not that it's like a series or it's like super connected, but just wanted to own some of the facts that man, sometimes things are kind of rough out there when it comes to the things that Christians do or that people are known for out in our culture. And so, Sid, Lisette, if people want to know a little bit more about you guys, they can jump back to last week. We kind of did a bit of an intro, but let me just start us off with the conversation. We'll jump in. What do you do when the news headlines are bad for Christians? And
does that exist? Is that a thing?
I haven't seen much, like no documentaries. There's nothing going out there
nothing
right
like
now.
that. Nothing on Netflix these days. No, we're good.
Nope.
The news, and let's just say the news is like obviously like formal news outlets, but also just your social feed. You can cycle through and you find a few people. You're like, oh, that's not great news, or you're taking shots. And so, I think for us as youth workers, volunteer youth workers, we have students that are in the world. They're connected with our culture. They're seeing and hearing some of these stories, and we just need to know, what are we supposed to do with all of that? And full disclosure, I'm coming from Canada. Sid, you're in Canada. Lisette, and we know you're in the South. So Canada and US, we've had just even recently some big stories that have broken on both the Canadian side of the border, the US side. I don't necessarily know if there's, bad news for Christians in like maybe the UK. I'm assuming there probably is, maybe in parts of Africa. I know we got listeners over in the Middle East. So wherever you're coming from, if you don't have these kinds of things happen, then consider yourself blessed. But we seem to have some issues. So what should we do when the news headlines are bad for Christians, Lisette? Tell us.
Quit your job and run? Like, I don't know. I don't know what no.
Stay in bed, hide your head under the pillow. I was talking to a friend the other day who's right in the middle of it, like right in the middle of it. And I said, bro, are you getting out of bed these days? How are you doing? Well, it's been a while, but I'm starting to. And which is funny, one of the things he said is, as long as I'm not reading my email or checking my social media, I seem fairly functional. So it's so real, you guys. This is so real.
It's so real. It's so real. And then you're in the midst of it and you're hanging out with teenagers and they're like, guess what? Right? And I guess I think as I get thinking about it, I just don't think there's any way for us to not have the conversation. And in fact, I think it's actually super unhelpful for us not to. I think one of the greatest critiques of the church globally, both the Protestant, the Catholic Church, all that has been this desire to hide things or to cover things up or gloss over them. So I don't think we can do that. But I think what we can't, go.
No, hey, listen, this is super personal. Actually, I just thought about this for a second. Sorry, Lisette, I wanted you to wait till you're done your thought, but I wanted to come to it. Let me give you a personal example of this, why I think for us volunteers, it's so important for us to be addressing this. So my son is in a youth ministry where one of his youth pastors was criminally charged, and it went into the newspaper. And so that came out in the newspaper. It was it was an online local newspaper where the story came out. Before he got to school, he'd got a text from his basketball coach from another city that asked, "Hey, how are you doing? Are you okay with this?" He went to his mom and said, "Mom, when I go to my socials class, how am I going to answer the questions from the teacher and my friends about how I respond to what happened with my youth pastor?" And then he was processing his own personal journey that he'd had with him. And the amount of weight that he was carrying because of what had taken place in his own ministry with like leadership there, he was just looking for someone to help him carry that and journey through it. So there's so many angles and weights to it that I think as volunteer leaders, we really do play a very important role in how we kind of process, address, and work through these very real issues that our students are carrying, and not just for themselves personally, but also how it positions them in conversations outside of their own personal environment,
Yeah, let me
1,000,000%.
let me just say that maybe, for you as a volunteer that are listening, maybe this is something that you're like, oh yeah, I understand what you guys are talking about. But maybe there's a couple of you that are like, what's going on here? Because obviously we're, Sid, Lisette, myself, we're all vocationally in ministry. So we kind of feel these really personally because we know sometimes when a lot of the people or the stories and the backstory, if you're just reading yourself on the news or hearing about it kind of broadly, it seems like there's kind of two stories that come out. There's the failure of leadership, the moral failure of leadership, where leaders have been in a position of power and they've done something wrong, inappropriate, sinful, evil. And so because of that, a light has been shone on them. Sid, you just gave us an example of that. And so all of a sudden we're grasping, how do we articulate? How do we understand that? How do we deal with that? There's this other side of it that sometimes is less in like the public newspapers, but oftentimes on our social feeds, where we might see leaders who walk away from church or ministry or disengage with parts of our faith or want to start taking shots at our faith from with the inside. And so students are now watching and not seeing that, the body of Christ is together and unified, but instead that there might be a little bit of division here. And it's hard to understand and know, I was trusting that person. And all of a sudden they're telling me that the church I'm going to is no longer the right church because they left that church or whatever it might be. There's tons of those types of examples. So in both of those settings, those are like news headlines. They're on our feeds. And it's tough. It's bad for us and it's bad for our students. And so, how do you what are you supposed to do, Lisette? Like, is it something that there's like a 5-step plan to wading through that mess? And I hear you not say, let's not gloss over it. I think that's encouraging. Yeah. Do we bring it up all the time? Like, I've got a 6-year-old. Does he need to know about the last moral failure of a megachurch pastor, or how do we divide the line here of what to say and who to say it to?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And I don't think there's a perfect answer, but I think there's a couple of things that come to mind. First of all, if it involves you personally and you as a volunteer leader feel like you're caught in the midst of it really pretty emotionally, I just want to really strongly encourage you to make sure that you've got the right people around you to process with, that you're having good conversations, that you can ask the questions you need to ask before you ever try to talk about it with a teenager. I just think it's really important for us to kind of know where we are and be somewhat stable before we try to address it with kids. If you're not
Lisette,
connected
real
to
quick,
go.
Like exactly what you're saying there. We don't air our emotional baggage with our students, right? Like, our students are not the people. We process our own emotional. We should have emotional baggage and things that we need to wrestle through. But let's be really clear. We want our leaders to have peers or people above them that they can work that out. You are there primarily as a support and guide for your kids as they're working through their kind of emotional weight or baggage. And I think it's really important for us to differentiate that's really clear how we enter into those conversations. I love that you brought that up.
Yeah. Then I think as far as it being just something else or something broader, or you're in a healthy space, I think there's two things. I think one, when it's like actually an elephant in the room, you bring it up. If it feels like everybody's thinking about it, everybody's talking about it, but they don't know how to talk about it together, you start the conversation. Hey, listen, we know this is happening, right? Then you put it out there and you make it safe to talk about. On the other hand,
can I just jump in on that? Because it makes me think of sometimes, you might know a student has, posted about something or has brought up something. And so it might even be that in your small group, you just recognize like, hey, there's 1 or 2 students that are really processing this. Maybe the rest of the group doesn't even know. Could be a good opportunity to actually just ask the question. Hey, I think a couple of you had seen, did you guys see there was this news report or this thing that kind of came up and this thing happened? This is what it seems to be like. And hey, what are you guys thinking about when you see that? Or how do you feel when you see that? Or what kind of questions do you have? And so you flip it back to kind of gauge what's happening in the room and make that safe place for them to maybe ask the questions before you try to, not that this is what you're saying at all, Lisette, but of course we don't want to say, hey, you guys saw something bad happen. Here's the right response to it. Like, we want to make sure we're understanding where students are coming from.
Yeah, I think that's so good. And then I really do think it's important to what you're saying, Jer, is like ask the questions and let them give responses. Let them have the time and the space. Because I think one of the things, there was a psychologist that came and did a bunch of youth worker training with us at one point. And one of the things he said is that kids are unbelievably intuitive, but they tend to draw the wrong conclusion. And so they will feel the things, they will sense the things, but they don't know what that means all the time for them. So he talked about this little girl who her dad was trying to explain to her about how they were going on a plane for the first time. And so we took her to the airport to watch the planes so that she would have an idea of what was going to happen. A few nights later, she's in tears and she's so upset about going flying. And so he asked the question and she said, I just wonder, when you become small, do you get to be big again? Because for her, what she saw was the plane go up and it got really small. Will you become big again? Right? Like, so the child understood something happened, just didn't know what that meant for them. And I think lots of times when our kids are watching these things happen, especially if they're within their own church, especially if it's a youth pastor or somebody connected to the ministry directly, what does that mean for them? What does it mean about them? And you have no idea what questions they're asking or what conclusions they're drawing if you don't ever give them a space to talk about it. But I think even when it's way bigger, right? I think one of the dangers we have right now is kids are watching these things happening. Honestly, adults are too, but kids are watching these things happening. And what's the conclusion that they draw? Potentially that the church is untrustworthy, that Jesus is untrustworthy, that nobody is safe, that you're not even safe. And how do we help them try to like pull those things back far enough to go, it was a person making a really bad decision. That doesn't mean Jesus. That doesn't mean the whole church. It doesn't mean whatever. But unless you give them space to really process and talk about it, you'll never know what kind of conclusions they're drawing. We can't draw them for them.
Well, and I think, Lisette, I think too, like sometimes we'll ask the questions, right? And some of our kids might not be engaged at that moment in the conversation, which is really okay. What happens is when we create space to have the conversation, at some point our kids will become engaged and they'll go, oh, it's actually healthy and appropriate for me to talk about this. This isn't something that we hide or pretend doesn't exist, but we actually do, like there's a place that's safe for us to work through it. So I think even as we check, because again, like you said, our kids are intuitive, but different kids are at different spaces on the journey. We don't want to assume on that. We don't want to unnecessarily put a weight on them that they're actually not really ready to or engaged in at that point in time. So I think that exploration part is really, really good, but it has impact not just in the moment of the exploration, but what it says to kids about what's appropriate, okay to talk about, safe people to come and talk to. And I think that in and of itself is also a big deal.
Yeah, I think part of that is, for some students, this will be maybe not something that they're dealing with in this moment. So I just think about sometimes, you might have no issues or scandals and, a great season of lots of trust and all sorts of good things happening. But if you still recognize and see some of these things that are happening maybe more globally or outside just the walls of your own, particular area, it can be worth to talk about because students are going to face this kind of brokenness at some point. And if you can give them a little bit of the language and a way to practice and a way to build some muscles on how to understand that kind of stuff, then when they leave your ministry or leave even, the context of your small group or the ability to have, now they at least know a little bit of how they might be able to process it. And so they're not floundering on their own without the community to be able to help source that with them. I think, is that fair? I guess it's still, you can't
saying yes.
Yeah, but you have to figure out how to do it in the right way, which is the hard, like, again, I don't want to talk about like crazy church failures with my 6-year-old. So like, I don't know if you do that. Do you do that with middle school students, or like, how do you talk about it with a grade 7 guy who's like, gosh, he doesn't even know how to find a news site he's playing Minecraft. And so what's up?
Jared, I just think about, this is where we ask the Lord to really give us wisdom. And this is where wisdom is really necessary, not like policy or formulas. So what are the things I'm looking for? First of all, I'm thinking about Ephesians 4, where it says, don't let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouth, but only that which is helpful for building others up. So I'm going, okay, depending on kind of the age, the emotional involvement, knowledge, what will be helpful for building them up in this conversation. So I'm asking for wisdom there. I'm thinking sometimes, it's not my whole small group that's at a place where they're ready to process this, but there's an individual who's maybe involved in the conversation. So it's going to require me doing a one-on-one maybe before it comes to the group, or I'm just trying to be really aware of the chatter so I can, be aware of, try to understand what people are aware of. How can I lead into that? And then the other thing I'm thinking about is some of our kids have a deeper personal connection to some of these things. So Lisette, we've mentioned this as well. When we have a child who maybe has a parent on staff in a church that's going through a season of like public brokenness, if you will, then I want to be aware how we're addressing that with that child in that space as well, and both guarding that child and guarding the other kids and how we go about that conversation and who's there. So there's a real complexity to it. I do think we're asking for wisdom. I think, again, and we say this a lot, like the wisdom we seek is from the Spirit through the Word, but also in community, right? So if I'm a volunteer leader, I'm not sure how to address this. I know it's happening. I think it's really wise to go to the person that's over me and just say, hey, do you have some wisdom on this? What do you think? What would be a right way for me to kind of lean into this? Or do you know something I don't know? How do we go about doing this? And I just think, getting that wisdom in community is really important as well.
Okay. So can I do, before we kind of come towards an end here, can I give like some situations and you guys kind of, without using specifics, so like generic, let me come up with a situation. and you guys kind of help us think about what the right way to process. Is that cool?
Let's give it a try.
Okay, so personal known connections. So Sid, you kind of referenced one, obviously from your own home. So it's maybe not something that a student is like completely personally connected to, but let's say they know, hey, there's somebody in our church, something happened. Maybe they weren't, again, ultra connected, but they've heard of it because it's in the news or it's being talked about. And so now you've got your grade 6 small group. What do you do the week after that it goes public, or what do you say in that kind of setting?
I mean, for me, I think I would just be saying, gosh, I think a lot of us have maybe heard about this. How are you feeling about it? I would ask feeling questions. I would probably ask about what information do you wish you had that would help you understand it better? Because sometimes they just don't know what they don't know. And then I'd be trying to remember, especially with 6th graders, like with kids that young, I'd be thinking anything they're telling me is what they've heard from their parents.
Well, that's smart.
So just to remember that whatever you respond to is going home also. So if they're like, well, I think they so deserved it, da-da-da-da-da-da-da, probably because they heard a parent say it. So for us to like oppose, or anyway, just to always be thinking about what conversation happens after the conversation we're having.
Lisette, let me try this one. I want to hear what you think about this too. The one thing that I'm always looking for, and again, this is so challenging, depending on what people have heard. We always know, I think I'm always trying to acknowledge that there's multiple sides to every story. So trying to give a little bit of perspective. So I'm always like, hey, there's always like, I play with 3 sides, my side, your side, the truth. So I don't want to like take away, like I don't want to try to defend someone who's done something that isn't defensible, if that makes sense. But just enlarge the idea that there's multiple sides that we should just be aware of. We don't have all information, but that doesn't mean the information we have isn't like real and serious. So I want to be careful about that. And then the other thing I'm trying to do, you guys, and there's timing for this, but then I go, how would Jesus have us respond to this? And if I can lead in that conversation, even with the information we've been given, I think what I've done is I've separated maybe a miss that the church has had or a miss that someone in the church has had from who Jesus is, right? So that's just a cognitive separation already, that person's failure, like you're going to deconstruct that person or you might deconstruct that church. That's actually appropriate to think critically about it, but that's different than Jesus. Like Jesus isn't that. And so for me, it's helpful to try to frame it there, even early on. And that again, that can include all sorts of different types of responses, but I think that's helpful in separating what it is we're trying to critique or talk about.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think also just to try to help kids remember that they probably know both sides. They know people on both sides when it's local, and they probably love people on both sides.
Yeah.
And so they don't know how to still love people on both sides and take a side, right? And so how do we help kids say it's okay to be like really hurt and really upset and still love someone? It's okay to wonder, like, I don't understand all the details. And I think also to be able to say like, gosh, I'm so grateful when I'm with kids to be able to say, I'm so glad we didn't have to make any of these decisions because we don't know all of it. So maybe we can pray about it together and try to love people in the midst of it, Hey, Lisette,
would you say that maybe when it comes to, because sides are taken, I wonder if as a volunteer leader in that conversation, the side we want to take is the side of the student. So how are we actually for the student in that conversation? And by good. That, we're really thinking about, how do we help them process? How do we help them, work through anger or perspectives or, you know what I mean? So we're not trying to take a side maybe in the argument or that's taking place broadly, but we're trying to take the side of the student and come alongside and journey with them. And I think that can help us avoid some really strong pitfalls that will remove us from the opportunity to actually shepherd kids through these like really difficult circumstances.
Okay, let me try another situation on you guys. Let's go public news story. So like maybe it's it's on the national headlines, so we're not personally connected to it. And probably our students don't necessarily, they're maybe not tracking it. They might find something on a TikTok somewhere, a little bit about it, but to be honest, it's not quite as personal. So, but it's still happening and it's out there, and we know that they're going to deal with these kinds of stories going forward. What would you do if you've got a grade 9 group and you're seeing stuff go public? Do you bring it up with them? Do you use it as a case study? What do you do with that?
I want to do a flyby. That's what I'd want to do. Because here's the thing. I just think we were talking about this at one point, just in a conversation, the three of us, but it's kind of like you want to try to get your kids, if possible, to a funeral before it's someone that matters a whole lot to them. You want to have the sex talk with them before the world is having the sex talk with them. It's like all these just like teachable moments where you're trying to help give them a framework for the world they're going to engage. Right. And so I think actually it's kind of wonderful when it's not super close to you. It's a little easier to handle. But to even say, gosh, have any of you seen this? And to help them see that, people are broken, people make mistakes. But that doesn't mean that God is not who he said he is. And that doesn't mean there isn't a way for restoration and redemption and reconciliation and whatever that looks like. And so I think to just help kids see, they're going to see stuff. I don't know that any of us, I bet you nobody listening to this, I would guess, unless you're really, 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 really fortunate, have never had a moment with a church where you've wondered what was wrong with it, right? With someone in the church. We've all experienced some level of conflict or hurt or something, but somehow we're still here. We still say that Jesus is who he said he is, and we still invest in the church. So how do we help young people have that kind of resilience? I think that's by prepping them for it and giving them small tidbits and small skills and tools along the way so that they can separate the humanity from their faith, right?
That's really good. I've had these times driving with students is usually when we'd bring it up, and, you have a carload of kids and start talking about some deep things. I'm always amazed at what they actually think when you ask them questions about some of these big issues. Like sometimes I think wading into it, like they're going to be confused or they're not going to have like a clear thought. And like they start ripping back, sometimes like super conservative, like really intense kind of thoughts about this. Like, how dare that person? And of course things are supposed to be good. And you're like, oh, wow. Like you've got some strong feelings and thoughts that are different maybe even than what I would have imagined. So maybe even just making sure again, like we've got to ask the questions up front and not assume, because it'll be potentially surprising how much students are willing to engage in those types of topics and even where they land in the midst of the conversation. I know I've been surprised. Sid, do you want to add anything about how to talk about those public news stories?
There's just Jared, there's a couple things on the top of my brain just right now. So if we were go, hey, what's, as we kind of bring it to the end, what's on the top of your brain? I just think you guys, like one of the pieces I think about is we have an opportunity to help our kids again differentiate between what's an issue of Jesus and his character and who he is, and what are issues of the church or the issues of us as broken, sinful human beings. Do you know what I mean? And I think when I'm looking at students who are kind of going through the process of deconstructing faith and such things, oftentimes what I think is they're actually deconstructing maybe church politics or an institution that isn't functioning the way that God would have them to, or people who aren't living the way they should be living. And I want to say, yeah, there's a type of critical thinking and deconstruction that should happen there. The problem is we associate all those things with God himself, and so it becomes a deconstruction of faith and the person of Jesus Christ. And this is a chance for us to kind of separate those two. And so I think it's really, when we do have the opportunity, this is a really important role we get to play in the discipleship of a young person and helping them work through and categorize and clarify what are some of the issues that we're actually talking about and how we should process them in a healthy way. What's an appropriate, healthy, emotional response? Like we should be angry about that because that's really wrong and it's not just and it's hurtful. So we should be angry about that and we should stand against that. That's appropriate to do so. We should also also somehow be for even our enemies, right? What does that look like for us to be for our enemies in the midst of this? What's the right way that Jesus would have us walk in the midst of this time? So I just want to say again that this is really complex. It's really hard. It's unfortunate. It's nothing new, by the way. And yet God is still a work in our brokenness, always has been, is, and will be. But we actually can see this as an opportunity to do deep discipleship with our kids by listening, by modeling, by asking great questions, and by continuing to point people to a way Jesus would have us be in the midst of this brokenness. And I think that's so in my hopeful moments, when I'm not depressed by the headlines, I go, oh, there's actually a redemptive way forward that we get to have in the midst of this, and we should keep fighting to lean into it.
That's great. Lisette, I'll give you last word as we are coming to a close. Anything else that you want to say to our volunteers that are going to, in the days ahead, engage some of these conversations with students?
Gosh, we're so grateful you do what you do, because what you do matters more than you think it does. And the world has not changed, and it has changed all at the same time, right? These aren't new issues, but they're new to TikTok. They're new to the headlines. We have a new world that spews them at them faster. But the thing that matters still the most to them is who they see in front of them. And so the chance for you to be somebody who loves them, who cares about them, who's honest, who's authentic, but keeps pointing them back to Jesus will matter more than you ever think it will. So keep doing what you're doing.
That's great. We'll see you guys back next week for another episode of the Volunteer Youth Worker Podcast.